Welcome to Lunch with Tech Leaders, where we have engaging conversations about software development and cloud engineering with industry leaders and subject matter experts. These episodes are created by the Great Lakes Tech Leaders, an online community of technology practitioners. Please come join the conversation by visiting gltl.rbn.ai. Again, that's gltl.rbn.ai. Now strap in, because we're deploying to production in 3, 2, 1.
Cool. So we decided to talk about AWS networking today. So
Nice.
we've been doing a lot with the transit gateways and really enjoy working with those.
Kind of some design principles as well, right? Kind of overall design and guidance as well that we try to provide some structure around.
Nice. Yeah, it really changes the way that we're designing networks. Go ahead, Mike.
I was going to just say I'm relatively new to these. I'm not sure if these are called guilds or if these just more kind of informal discussion, but I'm new to them. So I'm not sure what's I don't want to say typical, but I'm not sure what normally happens.
Oh yeah, so
yeah,
the format is like completely basically sitting around a lunch table. Doesn't matter, we're just here to chat about stuff, throw a topic out there, gripe about it, rave about it, whatever you want to do.
Yep. Yeah, topics can change as well, so kind of just the flow of discussion can go wherever we want it.
Yeah. Okay. Don't have to stay on topic.
I'm excited though to talk about, so I think I was mentioning our team or within our groups, which I'm head of our technology group, which includes development, DevOps, sort of more kind of traditional IT and things of that nature. But of course, it includes cloud. And so recently we had a situation within AWS that required us to, I think what I'll call and use some advanced networking these days, right? And so we found some kind of issues along the way, I think, and I don't know that we're totally out of the woods, so it might be interesting to hear some perspectives or some viewpoints. But definitely was beyond just a typical VPC to VPC peering or things like that. We're looking at going region to region with an AWS, and then needing to bolt on and consume some on-premise workloads, which was a little bit more complicated than I think we had initially, sort of thought out. And AWS has some great documentation and some great guidance, but it's totally different when you're in the weeds and when you're actively looking for and working toward a solution. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think that's, kind of an area that we've had quite a bit of experience with. And I think that coincides with the transit gateway that we were talking about. Transit gateway really, that allows for network traffic to flow from one VPC to another, from a VPN connection to a VPC. And you're able to actually now have transit gateways across region. Yeah, via transit gateway attachments, and also cross AWS account. So I mean, like that coupled with some sort of VPN solution, either like a site to site or AWS's the client VPN, or the client VPN or the site to site VPN, that would probably allow for you to get cross region as well as back to your on-prem environment. Yeah, and so essentially that's sort of what happened is we ended up putting in some guidance, general guidance with AWS, because we did get stuck, and spoke with someone who said, well, all you need to do is VPC peering across region to region, but of course the the transit gateway is required because the routes are not I'm not sure exactly how to say that, transcendental. And so when we get to resources on site, of course, the routes just sort of go into a black hole, and they don't actually get there. The traffic doesn't get there, and so we ended up establishing a traditional site-to-site VPN between our AWS region and the on-premise ASA, and that works, right? But I think what we're starting to see now is a little bit more latency than I thought I would see. And of course, the traffic's not going over the public internet, it's going over AWS's backbone. But we're trying to traverse from Mumbai all the way to North Virginia. And I think I was hoping for something a little bit better. It's definitely usable, but I think we're sort of at right now is potentially evaluating the use of direct connect.
That's a good point.
Yeah, and that's where honestly things are, they go from being complicated to a different level of complexity altogether. But I think we saw something that was about 180 milliseconds a round trip, which not terrible, but that adds up over time, right? And so I think we're sort of at that fork in the road where we'll do some testing, and I think we'll get to a place where either we're going to move this data that's in North America to closer to the edge, or we're going to try to improve that latency from site to site, maybe direct connect or something like that.
Right. The main gotcha with the direct connect is usually the pricing. So I mean, if that's something that is okay, that could certainly be a possibility in that case to lower that latency.
Well, if you have those type of requirements, they're going to have to deal with that pricing, right?
Yeah,
Is
that's true. Yeah, 100%.
Is the data already in a location that's hooked up to direct connect, or if we're talking pricing, you gotta get it hooked up?
No. Yeah, no. So this is a site that has never been, let's just say, connected to the cloud. It's always and when I say cloud, like public cloud, this is our private cloud.
Okay.
But I think that's true. I think from the pricing that I saw for direct connect, and we only required a 1 gig connection, even that was too much. I think I saw something that, when we were looking for 4 nines or, really, really high levels of SLA. I think I saw something that was about $1,000 a month. And then I saw things that, if we were willing to have some, less of an SLA, less redundancy, less availability, stuff like that. I think I saw like a $400 to $600 option a month, and I don't really have an issue with that as long as it works, right? I think for us the goal is not it's not really a cost discussion at this point. It's more kind of feasibility, and then finding out what performs the best, and then taking that back and figuring out how much of a budget realistically do we meet or exceed, and I don't think we quite know that yet. And of course, the performance isn't terrible. 180 milliseconds, to me, I was expecting it to be way worse than this, but the sort of use case for us is we've got staff that's overseas today. We're looking at putting them in a different place overseas, and ultimately being able to access SMB shares on a Windows server is really all it is, right? That data today exists in North America, but it could exist, I guess, potentially anywhere. It is relatively large, right? So that's another kind of consideration too. Ingress, egress charges, but also the hosting and the data itself. But
What type of access do they typically have? Is it mostly reads? Like, I'm wondering if you could like replicate some of this data.
yeah, so I think we sort of wondered that too, and I think that's a great point. So everyone will probably cringe when I say this, but years ago, and I'm going to say this is closer to like 8 or 10 years ago, we used to use Microsoft's distributed file system, or DFS, and that worked for a period of time until we got to having not petabytes but terabytes of data, and then that became a problem. And so I think that we had wondered about, you know, putting that data, replicating that data. I'm not sure if it's FSX, but Microsoft or AWS did offer some kind of a Windows managed solution for, you know, file shares and stuff like that.
Right.
So, you know, I think we had maybe considered or thought about that, and or just bringing up an EC2 server that's running Windows to bring the data, not all of it, but bringing a replicated copy closer to the edge.
Well, I would probably look at, you know, what the things you're saying are speaking loud to AWS's storage gateway, where you can have it in cache mode. It acts like a SMB share, but your data is actually stored in S3, and then you can set it, like you can give it disk space close to your, like close to your users, and it'll cache heavily used items.
Okay, and I'm familiar with that. I'm not really sure. I think we're still kind of in a, you know, very you know, a discovery or kind of exploration phase at this point, but I think that there's a little bit of a desire to have less and less gear on site. And so of course the storage gateway, you know, like today we're running ESX, and so there's some gear there for compute and storage.
Yeah, the cool thing about storage gateway is it's just an image, and you can run it in EC2, so you can technically, like, you know, run it in, because your users that you're concerned about are, you said, are in Dubai, but your data is here, right?
They're over so Asia Pacific South, but yeah, I mean the data's here in North America.
Yeah, so I mean you could run an EC2 in a region close to them. I mean, just a thought, you know, have that on private network. But again, that kind of like it goes to like, it sounds like you're still in discovery phase. So like, what's the access type? Like, is it typically writes, or is it a lot of reads, or good heavy mix of both? Or
yeah, and I think in a little bit too, this is something I think that we all struggle in the industry or in our world too, is you know, today we've got people that mostly work on site or work out over VPN. And so there's an expectation, I think, of performance and read and write, performance and availability and stuff like that. And so as we move out to a more remote or cloud-based solution, there's definitely going to be some latency introduced. It just, I think, you know, comes down to how much is acceptable and how much latency does the end user, does the person who's working with the data, how much can they tolerate where it becomes unproductive, right? And I don't think that we've completely vetted that out or had that discovery yet, right? It's not local area network access, but maybe something closer to, you know, something that's acceptable or within a range.
Yeah, that's important component to understand. A lot of ways to go about implementing the solution for that, but yeah, just figuring out what's, you know, what your needs are, I guess, in that case.
And I probably should have said too, I didn't kind of start out with an introduction, but in our business, we're Detroit based, or we're based out of Michigan. And we work mostly and very heavily in the automotive field. And a lot of the work that we're doing or we do has to do with the vehicle data itself, and it's a more complicated kind of explanation. I'm trying to keep it higher level, but you know, essentially we've got data that we are either creating or we're pulling in some kind of engineering data doing some updates, doing something with it, and creating an output or a deliverable. And so a lot of that data gets consumed out of a Windows repository or SMB share. We use some client tool, whether it's Adobe or some other, some other tooling. And then we then create a final output, which then gets stored in the same kind of share or the same repository. And I don't think we're unique, but I think a lot of organizations, a little bit has to do with the pandemic and COVID, but some of it just has to do with needing to scale up some of our teams and resources, and where I think have historically done that, it's becoming harder, or we're just having to look for other places. And so I'm trying to remove, I think, some of the on-site data. I'm trying to decouple the on-site data repositories that exist in different places today, put those in a central place, and sort of streamline how people are accessing the data. And just to kind of complete this circle or this thought for a second too, is we're essentially using AWS workspaces to do that.
Okay, so that's kind of giving you environments to work out of the cloud.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep, and it works perfect. It's like, because instead of, there's security and there's some other inherent issues with having to manage all the physical endpoints and laptops and all those things. And so for us, creating a Windows 10, Windows 11 environment, publishing the tools that a person or staff would need, and then essentially providing access to the data is what the sort of bigger lift is right now. And that's where that got us to that region to region, right? So Asia Pacific to US East, establishing that connectivity between VPC, and then coming all the way across and accessing the data that's here in Michigan.
Yeah,
Right.
I kind of still agree with Derek in that point. It's like the AWS storage gateway, that is really an EC2 server that acts as like, it gives you that NSF file storage, but it's backed by S3, and caching it then in that case is, that would allow for you to access that at a faster rate in a different region, wherever that EC2 server is hosted. If you have it in Mumbai, or Mumbai, that should effectively allow for your users in that region. And are they working out of AWS workspaces in Mumbai?
So that's the idea. And to be honest with you, I don't think that we have completely understood that piece of it either. So that timing that I gave you, round trip, that we saw of like 180 milliseconds, that's from us accessing that workspace here from the United States. And I wondered, and we haven't gotten there yet, but I wonder if the person that's accessing workspaces in Mumbai and then coming across, is that time really about half that? I'm not sure, right? Because we're accessing from the US that Asia Pacific workspace, logging into that Windows, and then coming all the way across region to region, and then over the site-to-site VPN. And I kind of wonder if maybe it's actually going to be less than that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, the site-to-site between those spots is probably, well, sorry, I might have missed something. Is how are you getting between regions?
So region to region, we've got the VPC established using transit gateways.
Okay.
It is transit gateway, and it's not just strict VPC peering, right?
That's right. We tried the VPC peering, and the problem with that was we need the transit gateway because the transient routes are not carried through without the transit gateway.
Right. Yeah, because you need BGP there.
Yeah.
I wonder. I've never really looked at the performance between transit gateway peering. I wonder if you might be able to pay for more performance if you go to like use like AT&T or Verizon backbone through like an NPLS by like connecting you mentioned
Direct connect.
direct connect. So you would do like a direct connect to like one of those service providers, and then basically pay them for throughput
Yeah.
to get to your other region, which you would direct connect into that region. And
Yep.
then, but man, that's
Yeah. The
you're
other consideration
getting
that
up
I
there
kind
in
of thought
spend.
about too is we don't use like SD-WAN. We use more what I call, and this is a little bit, I think this goes back a couple of years ago. And then, people, marketing or sales made this more of an SD-WAN play or an offering. But we use that product from Silver Peak for WAN optimization or caching.
Mhm.
And I think to that point though, about thinking about the storage gateway caching, that might actually be enough to absorb some of that.
Yeah, I'm curious about how it I haven't used it in a distributed manner, like where you would have like 3 or 4 different storage gateways effectively using the same backend storage. I don't know how it behaves when something needs to be invalidated. Right. I know that if you write to something, it'll invalidate, but if you've got like 3 or 4 different storage gateways, I'm not sure how they communicate. They might. I'm just not fully up to speed. I
Yeah.
would just make sure to take a look at that before you.
What one other kind of possibility too, just some background on us is, remember I mentioned at one time we had used more of the Microsoft distributed file system, and that was kind of effective in the beginning when the data sets were smaller, and then it became really just unmanageable. And if DFS or the distributed file system got out of sync, then things were really kind of catastrophic. And so we put in a tool that's called, this was from Talon, I think actually NetApp bought them. And essentially it's like a global file lock. And what happens is no one is allowed to write to a file if somebody has it open for editing.
Okay.
If that makes sense. And I'm trying to remember, there's another company that does this that's fairly massive. It's not Nusani. I can't remember the name off the top of my head. Apanzura, I think was the name of the company actually. And so, same kind of idea where there's that global file lock, and it keeps us from stepping on each other. Of course, there's the office that's here in the United States. We got an office over in China, and then one, soon to be over in India. And for the most part, we kind of stay out of each other's way in terms of, people stepping on each other's, data and overwriting or, losing changes.
Just by race condition of time zones, or what?
What's that?
Just by like a race condition.
Yeah,
time zones?
Exactly. But there are sometimes surprises though, and this is where we brought in that file lock, is we'll have people working, and I think the pandemic sort of exposed and created this problem, is, people were doing things unexpectedly at, times that they hadn't done things before. And so we sort of had this surprise of, I can't use the time zones any longer to separate workloads. And so I guess what I'm getting at too is I wonder if that would help us or hurt us. I guess I'm not really sure. But I think the good thing for us too is I don't need terabytes or hundreds of terabytes for us to test any of this out. It's like we just need a vehicle and a model year and or a subset of data, and we can do some testing from there. But yeah, I mean, appreciate all the insights. I think for us too, it's like this is definitely a new area that we haven't done before. And so of course there isn't a lot of just prior projects that we can go back to,
Right.
which is a little bit scary and exciting. But
Yeah, this is a interesting problem. And if the I love these like performance problems, right? It just really gets my geek on. So yeah, we welcome any, like, if you want to keep bringing like small pieces of this back and kind of help to get some thought around like each little part as you kind of work through it. We're more than happy to continue spitballing the stuff.
I think that'd be really helpful. The other thing too is I'm sure you guys, AWS, there's just constant updates and new offerings, and like stuff happens. I'm actually part of the AWS community builders group and have been for some time now. There's always a lot of sort of introductions about things that are changing or whatever, and I think these discussions are always really helpful, because by the time that stuff gets communicated, there's just so much of it, and the frequency is always just like ever changing. So by the time you get to something, and then, oh, by the way, you might not have a project that relates to any of this for some period of time later. You may just not know some of these things that could help you.
Oh yeah, tell me about it.
It's crazy.
We've got the RSS, like what's new feed coming into our Slack, and it's like one of those channels that I just can't.
Yeah, you can get 15 new updates a day.
Exactly. Yeah. Somebody had mentioned within our group, within our IT and DevOps groups, that they had heard that there was some kind of accelerator, and I'm aware of that within the VPC itself. But this is where it's like, we're not talking about accelerating like a VPC peering or like, or even, availability zones, or like, it's not like that at all. It's like, it's now I'm needing to accelerate from location or region to region, but oh, by the way, we have to carry all this traffic and routing and all this data and traffic all the way through to this endpoint, which is still on site. And so whether that works that way or not, I don't think so, but
it's a new offering, you're saying too, right? It's something
exactly. So
that needs to be investigated.
Right, and it might work. And I think AWS is support, like we've got not enterprise but business support, and it's always been pretty good. But I know when we originally sort of approached and had this problem, they were like, oh, just use VPC to VPC peering. And I'm not sure if the person didn't, even though we explained and kind of, shared some whiteboarding of what the objective and goals were, what they offered was mostly right, but it of course didn't work for us to get to the on-premise pieces. And I'm not sure what you guys talk about or hear, but I think that's the biggest, and I'm labeling that as like advanced networking, I think, these days, but I think that's where there's that sort of like greatest need, and it's the most complicated, is trying to hook in some of these hybrid on-premise scenarios where I think in our organization we'll have this need for a long time. There's a whole bunch of reasons why, but there's data and workflow and people and systems and things like that are on site, and they'll probably be on site for quite a while. But the rest of the world and there's needs to go to the cloud. And so how do we kind of bolt these and connect the plumbing together? And there's lots of ways to do it. I think in my experience, it's like there's really good ways, and then there's not so great ways, where we get there, but it doesn't really work that well. And, so kind of understanding the requirements up front, and, understanding what's the actual successful outcome that defines us being successful to use it and go forward, versus, we just got to connect it and it's working. Like,
Yeah, we had a big project with a financial institution that, obviously they needed low latency and stuff like that, and high resiliency. They were, focused in the US, of course, but um, the pattern that we established there was like everything. It was kind of like a mesh, because BGP kind of just, you know, did the necessary for routing, right? But the idea was like everything would attack everything, all of their on-prem locations, right? Either be offices or data centers or whatever, would connect to their MPLS through AT&T. So AT&T kind of worked as a core router and had that backbone with speed and stuff like that. And I believe we prioritized using that for going across regions and stuff like that. But then we also had like failover via, like the peering of transit gateways and stuff like that. So in case that, and so like AWS could, continue to, our resources in AWS could continue to, do what they needed to if, connections to the MPLS were down or vice versa. So, you kind of end up with this massive mesh of just connections all over the place.
Right.
And cost is a factor there. But when you're in a situation where you're, the cost the cost of speed is, losing you revenue or profits, it's worth it to really do the math and figure out what's the right where do we draw the line there, right?
And that's right. And I think for some of these things, like these are, I guess I'll say for some of these, we're talking about, tens of millions of dollars of work, right? So when we're talking about spending a couple $1,000s or $800 for connectivity, like I'm not saying I don't care, but that's one of those where it's the objective is more how do I move forward and establish something that works and performs well, and then maybe we can figure out and dial down the cost a little bit and say, I need the low latency, the availability. We can go back to the business and say, it's double the cost for me, of course, to provide 4 nines versus doing 3 versus doing 2, whatever. And that's more of a business decision about, maybe peeling back some of the other capability so it aligns with cost.
Right.
But I think for me, this is more exciting for us too. We're kind of at this place where it's like, well, let me just figure out how do we actually do this? Like, how do I actually get to, literally from point A to point B to point C. And I think we've mostly got it figured out, but I think what I'm saying is, I think what we're seeing is that, going over the AWS backbone is better than if we went over the public internet. But I'm just kind of wondering, I think, and not to be redundant, but we're wondering, do we then look at direct connect to, get the latency a little bit lower, or look at, I think what you're suggesting potentially, which is, using EC2 closer to the edge of Mumbai, using storage gateway, or, doing something to, cache some of the data there, and maybe have that be an option.
Yeah, I think you're going to be looking at a mix of those two, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if peering to transit gateways, I don't believe that uses like a quote AWS backbone, right? I think that is just kind of like a IPsec over public internet, if I'm not mistaken. I may be wrong about that.
Yeah. So,
but
yeah,
if you do direct connect to someone like I mentioned, like Verizon or AT&T, which can do things like provide you guaranteed speeds between their regions, and then direct connect into AWS, I think that's going to be where like you can get a guaranteed throughput between your regions, so you can get the transfer and then caching to like, to only use that when you need it type of thing,
Yeah, the way that it was explained to me from AWS or to us is by using the VPC or region to region, traffic. It's almost like using VPC endpoints, right? Where we make calls, but instead of making calls to S3 publicly as an endpoint, we make a call within the VPC.
Yeah,
And
using
so
the
it's
private endpoint essentially. So
correct.
yeah, it's all
Correct. And
within
so,
within AWS's network.
correct. And so the way that they had described that or viewed that is the data staying within their network or backbone versus us hopping and routing through a whole bunch of different providers. Now, whether
Right.
that's true or not, I'm not
Well,
sure.
I mean, I wonder if that's like, it seems like that's an oversimplification maybe,
Yeah,
right? Because while I mean, technically, if you're on a VPN, it is still in their network, right? But
yeah.
I haven't seen anything about like dedicated speeds or anything like that between two places. So
Mhm.
I don't,
Right. I mean, it's hard too because we don't actually have an office today that's like for all intents and purposes where this would be. What we do have is we have an office that's over in Shanghai, and we communicate site to site over VPN, not using MPLS, not using any private circuit. And we usually see about 140 milliseconds. It's about 130 to 140, give or take. And that's acceptable. We're not doing anything, that requires real time. It's not like video. We're not doing voice, anything like that. And so I wonder, actually, I guess, or we wondered, if we went a different route over AWS's backbone to get to Shanghai versus how we're doing it now, would we see roughly the same sort of latency or performance? And I think so, right? Because especially Shanghai, all roads kind of lead to that master firewall, that great wall that's there, right? And so there's not a lot of different entry points to get there.
That's a good point.
Yeah, but I'm not sure of that. I mean, it's again one of these things where, whatever, maybe 15 years ago or 12 years ago, when organizations and us included were saying, I need to virtualize everything. Well, we can't do that. We have to use physical servers because the performance isn't going to be good or whatever. And we found that's all not true, but it's just sort of one of these entry points where you've got to try something and just sort of see what happens and correct if it's not what it needs to be. So I think that's where we're kind of at.
Yeah, kind of build a proof of concept to see if the idea works and kind of evaluate it.
Yep. And I think the financials, I mean, for us anyways, getting rid of the majority of what's on site, today, in this, I'll use the China location for an example. That's a goal too, for sure, because I think a lot of the stuff that's there could be done, whether it's in EC2 or FSX shares. There's different ways I think that we can accomplish some of that stuff. It doesn't require us sort of do what we would have done years ago, which is, and when I'm saying years, it's actually further back than that. It's what we did 6 to 8 years ago, and doing something a little bit different today. So yeah, I would be kind of curious, and I know we're probably over on time, or are we good on time? I don't know.
yeah, I mean, we typically keep these at half hour, but if you got something throw in here.
I was going to say, just as we sort of talk about the networking components, and like especially within AWS, and I think this is more just of a comment, and I'm sure you guys have seen this or would agree to a point, is we get into NACLs and we get into security groups and we get into firewalls, and it becomes it becomes very easy to overly complicate a solution too. And I think some of us who are more tech savvy than others, or engineers,
Mhm.
we generally like doing this stuff. So it's very easy to go down a road of just overly complicating. And so I think we try to sometimes overly simplify the approach, because there's value sometimes in bolting on extra things, but for the most part, I think there's no extra credit for us overcomplicating things. If we get from point A to point B to point C and we do it in the simplest way possible, to me, that's a win. And later on, if we want to look at, bolting on additional services or features or stuff like that that benefit us, so be it.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'm totally in agreement with that. I like try and keep things simple as possible, unless necessary, right? Because,
Yeah.
you know, right brains, we're basically consultants. Our success is when our clients have business value. That's all we care about. Is business value to our customers, right? So if we come in and provide a solution that's too complicated for them to use in the long run, we might launch something, but if they have to completely re-architect it for their engineers to be able to figure it out, that's not a win for us, right? So
Exactly.
keeping things as simple as possible and only making those, uh, there's that delicate balance, right? Like
Yep.
if we design something that's extremely complicated on the back end but provides a simple user interface for someone to operate it, that's one thing. But when it comes to maintenance of those things, like how does that work? So
That's right. No,
definitely a balance you got to strike there, and you got to make sure that if you are going to be doing something that's super complicated and providing that user interface, or API layer to interact with it, that it's well documented, and maintainable.
Does it's Right Brains?
Right Brain Networks is the
Oh, Right
company
Brain.
that
Okay.
Ray, Morgan, and Joe work for.
So like outside of consulting, and sorry, this is probably a little bit of a tangent or a segue, or but
Marketing for us, hey.
okay, but like outside of consulting, is there development and sort of staffing that's offered?
We definitely do implementation.
Okay.
So we work in a, we'll come on board and help your team. We don't necessarily like staff aug because our engineers end up just kind of becoming part of somebody else's team.
Yeah.
And that's not how we like to work. We like to work on projects and make big, like I mentioned, like business value, have
Yep.
goals that we can say we've leveled up this our partner, the customer that we're working for,
Yep.
in some way, to provide them something that advances their
Okay.
their growth or their sales, their ingenuity, whatever it may be.
It makes sense. That's how things work. I mean, people want to roll in, roll off of stuff. I mean, keeps it interesting, keeps people engaged. Otherwise, like you said, it becomes like, they become sort of informally part of the organization, and we've
Well,
got
that
some.
and it's a little bit harder to make an impact with like one or two, like just a couple people sitting on a team.
Yeah, I agree.
That they might be making an impact, but it's a much there's a lot more value when we've got some of our team leads in there, working with PMs and stuff like that to make sure the
It's
project
not as visible.
yeah,
sure.
big and visible. That's perfect.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's good. I mean, because I think for us too, that makes perfect sense too. I think from the sort of complexity standpoint for a second, there's implementations or things I think that we've done more around the DevOps pieces, and I think some other stuff like that.
Yeah.
Where just the level of complexity in some of those things was too much, and it becomes difficult later on, not just the maintenance of it, but to get the funding to maintain it, enhance it, update it, make changes. You know, and sometimes it'll be one of those where it's so complicated that you know, you've got to spend all these cycles sort of decoding and figuring out, even if there's good documentation, like why is there all these different steps or all these different pieces to this whatever, let's say, you know, code deploy or pipelines or, you know, workflow and stuff like that. You know, and so if it's simpler, it just makes it the next time, you know, a team has to touch it for some reason, it's a little bit easier. I'm saying easier, but it's less complicated. You touch it less.
Absolutely. Again, that kind of goes to that, like, do we over engineer and make it simple up front, or do we keep it simple and you know, people can bolt on stuff as they need to? I think overall you should always be looking for reusability in anything you write, and extendability.
Yeah, I agree with that. Especially the repurposing, like, hey, we built this, like, we're like, now that we rebuilt it, or we built something to then reuse somewhere, like where else can I apply this versus everything's kind of custom for some piece of work or some customer or something like that, and none of it's really ever transferable to anything else, which I think we've got a little bit of that going on too. You know, so, but I am always sort of respectful. I'm going to call them legacy pieces, but stuff that's legacy, it's like it is serving some purpose. It is doing something that it was intended or put in to do. We're not being too harsh on the people that put it in, because like, well, you know, it is working.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, until it's not. Let's say it was working
right
when it was working, right? If you're looking at it, there's probably a reason.
That's right. That's actually a good point. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, obviously it worked at some point, and somebody was happy with it. But you know, it also goes to when attrition, when people leave. You know, anything that goes with them as far as knowledge is kind of is really rough. So.
Yeah, and yeah.
All right. Well, yeah, Mike, I really appreciate you coming in and bringing a topic here.
Yeah, you guys too. I mean, I'm not sure if this has already been discussed, but I think in the future, if there's and I think there's a lot more to kind of talk about this, and you know, essentially, you know, if there's discussions about you know, consulting needs and further, you know, discussions on help and things like that. We only kind of scratched the surface, or, you know, this is the tip of the iceberg. Like, we're talking about networking in AWS. But I think, of course, like there's a lot of other areas for sure. I'm going to use like DevOps, but that's for us, I think, an area, a lot of the things that you just mentioned, about, you know, people exiting or best practice, reusing, you know, and those sort of strategies and discussions and, you know, things. I think those are, I'm not sure if there's future topics or if there's already been stuff talked about, but that would be interesting for sure.
Yeah, rebuilding and reusing. Like, yeah, that's a huge one. And I know Derek does a great talk on, you know, an aspect of how that's done, such as the environments as cattle, but yeah, kind of building things that can be reused. And I think that'd be a great topic in general for one of these upcoming weeks.
Yep, I agree. And not to make this all about AWS, but I think for us, we've tried to purposely keep as much as we can natively within AWS. I mean, there's things that don't work well, or we go kind of outside of them. But where we can leverage, I think some of the tool set that's native to AWS without just going outside of that provider, because I don't know, someone's trying to, you know, pad a resume or get some skill on some hot new technology or new way of doing something. I think that'd be really interesting, though. For sure. And security, of course, too, which is always near and dear to my heart, to talk about security.
Oh yeah. Yeah, Ray, so you're leading the next one, so, you know, maybe one of those topics that was just brought up, you can toss into the mix.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. Yeah, sounds good.
All right. Well, want to thank you all for coming out. Hope you enjoyed lunch, and
Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you guys.
yeah, we'll do this again next week. Tom, appreciate you as always. So
Yeah,
I'll hit you up here in a little bit.
sounds good.
All right, cool. Well, thanks everybody. Have a good day.
Thank you guys. You
Too.
too. Take care.
See ya.
Bye.
So yeah.